So I'm Allie. Thanks for coming today. If you could just introduce yourself to us.
Okay. Hello, my name is Tanyka Abbott. I am also known as the Freedom Strategist. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I provide therapy, pardon me, through my private practice behind the veil consultations, and I'm also a certified life coach. And I work primarily with women who are experiencing either burnout or life situations such as guilt and shame due to traumas. And I also work with those within the faith based community who are in leadership, who are also dealing with these same types of life challenges so that they can overcome and walk in freedom.
Awesome. That sounds like a lot. You sound very busy.
Well, it can be at times, but it's a good busy. So I'm appreciative of it. I've been a therapist for over 26 years, and a life
Mhm.
coach for more than 20. So yeah.
Oh, great. Well, I'm so happy to have you on today. So we'll just get started about with the questions about how we can maybe process the guilt, and if you can give our people some tips here. So, from your standpoint, what is guilt, and what can cause that?
Okay. Guilt is really an emotional response to a perception of having done something wrong. It can come about from an actual wrongdoing. It can come about from either a perceived failure or unmet expectations. Sometimes we can see guilt as it's often shaped by our family, our environment, those that we're around in our family. Guilt can come about as a result of our faith, our beliefs, and even our culture.
Are there any common misconceptions that you see about guilt?
There are a lot. Um, Considering that question, there are two that I really want to highlight. And one is that guilt is a indicator that I did something wrong. Honestly, sometimes we have. I know I have in times when I've experienced guilt, but a lot of times people think that, guilt is a signal of wrongdoing. And then sometimes guilt can be misplaced. We will assume guilt for something that someone else did, but maybe because our boundaries are misaligned, we take on the guilt of that others should carry as our own guilt. Another misconception with guilt is calling what is shame guilt. And here's the difference. Shame says that I am wrong or I am bad, and guilt says I did something bad. And sometimes, depending on what the situation is that leads us to the emotion, we can mistake guilt for shame. So those
And
are
how
those
would
are
you,
two huge misconceptions that I see in the line of work I do, and even with myself.
right. So how would you be able to tell, like, if your guilt is yours or if it's somebody else's that they should be carrying?
Okay. I think the simplest example I can use is this. You and I are walking down the street. I see a rock. You may or may not see the rock, and you trip over it and fall. Oh my goodness, Allison, I should have told you that there was a rock right there. I feel so guilty for you tripping. No, I didn't make you trip. You either did or didn't see the rock. And as a result of that, you fell. But I'm taking ownership over something that you did. That's the simplest example that I can give of how we take on guilty feelings. When we look at emotions or we look at life situations, I think an example could be um, we're playing in the same house as children and you break something. And because I'm trying to be your friend, and we even do this in adult life. I'm making it a child's example, but we do this as adults as well, because I want to be liked by you. I will assume your wrongdoing. I'll take responsibility for that with others so that you don't have to, but I'm hoping that as a result of me doing that, that now you like me. Does that make
Mm,
sense?
it does. Wow. It seems so simple when it's explained, but obviously in the moment you're not thinking like that. So
And yeah, in the moment you are not. And I find, especially for conversations like these, it's really important that we use simple terms. I could come in here because I'm a clinical social worker. I do therapy. I could come in here with a bunch of clinical terms and you and the listeners would have no idea what I'm talking about. They'd be like, "Oh, she sounds good, but what she mean?"
right.
So I'd rather just really just put it in the simplest terms so that we can get it, because sometimes we complicate things that
Very
don't
true.
need to be complicated.
Yeah. I mean, that yeah, that is it makes a lot of sense, and I guess I never really even thought of it like that because I just had this conversation a couple days ago. I was like, I think sometimes we carry other people's guilt, but how do you distinguish that until you're, you know, in the moment you probably can't, but down the line, even now, like it's still hard for me to distinguish something that happened 10 years ago. Did I actually do something or was I just taking somebody else's guilt?
Yeah. And I
So,
think if we can step back and we can ask ourselves, what role or what responsibility do I have in this situation when we find that we are carrying guilt? Um, what did I do? What didn't I do? If we can answer those questions and we can answer them truthfully, not honestly, but truthfully, because when we're truthful, we say it is what it is. This is the situation. We're not filtering it. We're not adding anything to it. We're not taking anything away from it. When we're honest, what happens is we're guided by our emotions. Honesty talks about how I feel about a thing.
mm,
Truthfulness says this thing is what it is. So when we're honest with ourselves, especially when we're trying to determine, okay, is this my guilt or am I carrying the guilt that really belongs to someone else? We have to approach it from a place of truthfulness and not honesty.
mm, I can see that too. Again, something so simple you just don't think about. Um, wow, definitely opening my eyes already. We're only on the third question. Oh, um, do you think there are any like emotional signs or maybe even physical signs that we can recognize in other people who might be struggling with guilt, especially if they don't want to open up or speak to anybody?
Yeah, some of the emotional signs, which is also physical in a sense, and let me explain, is isolating. When we are carrying guilt for something we did do, or because we're assuming the guilt of someone else and taking it on as our own, sometimes we can tend to isolate. We don't want to be around people, or we don't want to be around individuals that remind us that we should feel guilty or that we are guilty. We can carry guilt in our bodies sometimes, upset stomach,
Mm,
pains. Sometimes it can be in our shoulders, again, and we get around certain individuals or certain places where maybe, let's say it's something that we are carrying guilt for that we should. And I'm going to clear that up in a second because I don't want that to sound as bad as it did in my head. Um, when we are experiencing guilt, we can feel it, in our shoulders. Sometimes we get that upset stomach. Sometimes we'll even get headaches. And it's because guilt is an internal emotion. There's, I don't know if you or your listeners have ever heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
mhm,
Okay. With guilt, what can happen is when that emotion, which is a lot of energy, guilt is an internal emotion, when that's stored and we're not releasing it, either verbally or sometimes through doing things like deep breathing or somatic exercises, it will find other places in our body to go and it will stay there. and it grows. Another Oh, let me go back to this. When I was saying sometimes the guilt, there is a good guilt and there is a complicated guilt. Good guilt would be, I went into the grocery store and I ate the apple and I never paid for it. That's a good guilt because I actually did do something that was against norms or values. Okay. And sometimes we will be motivated to do things or correct things as a result of that guilt. That challenging guilt again is assuming things that we are not responsible for. um Let me make this practical again because there may be some listeners who are experiencing guilt as a result of a trauma that they may have experienced. Let's say someone is assaulted, whether it's sexually, physically, or verbally. You're not responsible for that other individual choosing to behave in that manner. If you were violated verbally, violated physically, violated sexually, even violated financially, you're not responsible. And that's what perpetrators will do. They will say, "This is your fault. I'm doing this because of you." In my own life, that is one of the things that I experienced, and I took that guilt on. You are not responsible for what someone else chooses. That's the challenging guilt. That's the guilt that I know you and myself, we want people to give back. Don't own that. Don't carry that.
Right. And I think I I call challenging guilt is a probably better word than what I say. I usually say that's the toxic guilt. That's a guilt that, you know, for me, I call that the toxic guilt for myself because similar situations, but like I carried guilt that wasn't mine for a very long time. And there were times where it was debilitating. I couldn't do my normal stuff. It was eating me alive, so to speak. And it wasn't even mine.
Mhm.
And um, it took a long time for me to kind of realize that, oh, there is another whole part of guilt that, again, we don't really talk about. And um, yeah, so thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
Um, and do you think that guilt can sometimes lead to like a distorted sense of responsibility or self worth?
Oh, absolutely. When we are carrying one, and I'm trying to remember who termed it. Someone else uses the term false guilt. I don't necessarily ascribe to that because when you're feeling it, when you're thinking it, and when you come to believe that you're guilty, it's not false. Not to you. It's very real to you. So, and I'm not saying the term is wrong. It's just one that I don't ascribe to. Um, but when we are carrying guilt, it can manifest through a lot of things. Again, I talked about the isolating. What we can do is we can begin to do self-harm. And sometimes when people think about self-harm, they think about cutting an individual who be because they're trying to release pain, release guilt, will use an object, whether that object is a knife or a piece of glass or even your own fingernails, and they will mark themselves. The goal is not to kill themselves, but it's to release the pain sometimes so that they can say, I can feel something. They're numbing. Um, another manifestation could be, and I got so many going through my mind. I'm just trying to make one that sounds realistic for others. Avoidance, avoiding individuals, avoiding even if it's an individual who hasn't done anything to us, they didn't participate in whatever the event was that led to us feeling guilt, but we'll avoid, if we go back to the definition of guilt, where it can come from a family setting or either from a cultural standpoint. We don't, when we're feeling guilt, we don't want to be around things that make us feel even more guilt, so we'll stay away. We'll engage in excuse making. We'll engage in trying to convince ourselves of all the reasons why we should feel guilty. And then we go down this big rabbit hole. And it can lead us, for some, it can lead into depressed mood. For some, it can lead into clinical depression. And the difference between the two is with depressed mood, we all experience that at some point in our lives, okay? But clinical depression is marked. We're losing a sense of enjoyment in everyday life things. We have significant challenge with trying to even get up in the morning, trying to bathe ourselves, trying to clothe ourselves. We lose interest. Things that we once enjoyed, we don't. It can impact our eating. Guilt can impact our sleeping. So there are a lot of different ways, and I hope I'm answering your question.
You are. You're
Okay.
good. No, I think it's good because this is what I want. This is what I want. So you're doing
Okay.
fabulous. Um, what do you think, or what would you be able to give any advice on someone who's maybe just finally realizing that they are feeling guilt and maybe that what first step should they be taking to try to process this?
Okay. The very first thing, when an individual realizes that they're experiencing guilt feelings, I encourage them to give themselves some grace. Okay. You're not wrong for how you're feeling. That's guilt talking. I believe that all of our emotions, especially guilt, talk to us, and they only tell us things that keep us in that emotion. So give yourself grace because you allowed yourself to be truthful and say, this is what I'm experiencing. And then realize that processing the guilt that you feel is a process, it's not an event. You didn't feel guilty in 2 seconds, so it's not gonna go away in 1. The amount of time that it takes is not as important as the fact that you process it. And processing means that you address it. It means that you learn how it originated, where it came from, why it's there, how it's showing up in your life, how it's showing up in your belief system, and then working through that so that you can take the truth of the situation and apply it to that guilty emotion to allow it to be released. I never tell anybody, oh, just get over it. Oh, you shouldn't feel guilty. Just get over it. No, because things that we get over, we can fall back into. But if I work through it and if I process it, then I'm actually doing something with what I'm feeling. I'm learning the truth of it. I'm again learning how it shows up so that I can release it. That's the best way to process guilt. Now, also, it's important that you don't try to do it by yourself. Because if you're only relying on your own way of thinking, which has become your beliefs, you're only going to talk to yourself in the place of what it is you believe. You're not going to get that additional um, clarification from someone who can be objective. Now, again, I'm a therapist. So I believe one of the best places to process this emotion is through therapy, but it's not the only way. If you have a trusted friend, someone who speaks truth to you, not just someone who says what they think you want to hear, you can process the emotion of guilt with them. Some people don't like therapy. That's okay. You've got a trusted friend. You can, there are a lot of different avenues as well, like 988. Although that's the suicide hotline, the national suicide hotline number, you can call that number to be able to talk to someone and process your emotions. It is available. So there are avenues, but I never recommend you trying to process guilt by yourself, because what happens is you're really not processing it. You're finding alone, you're finding ways to remain feeling guilty. You're not learning how to work through it.
Right. And I would assume that um, there's not like a standard time frame for processing, and it would be different for everybody.
Let me tell you, if there was a standard way of processing guilt, I'd probably be a trillionaire. 'Cause I would market it in a minute. But there isn't that time frame. It is dependent not just on whatever the situation was that led to you feeling guilty, but more importantly, how long you believed it.
Mm,
Because your belief system is just as important as the event that led to you feeling guilty. And sometimes we can process the event easier than we process our guilt.
hmm. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense because I think our mind is very powerful.
Extremely, extremely. And what it does is, one of the things that guilt can also tend to do is guilt tends to replay itself. And that's how it becomes a belief. I tell those that I work with, everything begins with a thought. That which you think about, you're going to believe. And that which you believe, you're going to act out. So if I think about, and guilt will have you constantly thinking about all the reasons why you should be guilty. And if we step back, and this is one of the things I did when I had to begin processing my own guilt. I had to step back and I had to look at what it was I was actually telling myself. Again, I wasn't talking about the event. I was talking about how I felt
Right.
about the event, and I was talking about what I thought about me as a result of the event and where my responsibility was, and it was wrong because, again, what someone chose to do wasn't my responsibility. That action they conjured up and they engaged in. I just happened to be the recipient of it. But I only talk to myself about all the things I didn't do, or the things that I should have done, and the things that I did do. So I justified in my own mind why I was guilty. And I see this with those that I work with as well, whether it's in coaching or whether it's in therapy. The rehearsal, the constant rehearsal of what I did or what I didn't do. So I'm talking to myself. I'm thinking to myself about my actions that should make me feel guilty. And then I'm believing it, because if I said it to myself long enough, then it must be true. And then as a result of that, I act that out.
So you mentioned that you work with people with trauma. What does therapy or trauma informed care play into healing this sort of guilt?
Okay. So I'm going to answer this, but I'm going to put a little disclaimer out there first, just in case, because I don't want to offend anyone who is listening, especially if that person is a licensed clinician like myself. In my circles, sometimes I hear the word trauma informed, and I
Hmm.
hear individuals say, I'm trauma informed because I have neutral colors on my wall. That is not trauma informed. What you're doing is you're creating an environment for someone to like the colors on your wall. Trauma informed is caring, is tending to the person. Trauma informed is recognizing, especially if someone has been a victim of any kind of assault or abuse. I'm not going to walk up to you and immediately get in your space. I'm going to ask, is it okay if I approach you? That's trauma informed. Trauma informed is about the actions that we take. It is also about the language that we utilize. When we are trauma informed, we are mindful to not say, oh, well, you know what? Maybe that was your fault. Especially when someone's telling us, if we ask them the question, what has led to you feeling guilty? That's a trauma informed question rather than why are you guilty? So
Right.
trauma informed is about the actions that we take, whether they're physical or whether they're verbal. Now, yes, the aesthetics of an office that is calming, that is soothing, that feels safe. It is an aspect of leading to trauma informed care. It doesn't equate trauma informed care. Does that make sense?
It does. Because for me, I don't care how pretty or how not pretty your office is. If I'm talking to you and I'm not comfortable with you or I don't feel safe enough to open up,
Mhm.
that's it. Sorry, I'm probably not coming back.
Absolutely. Um, this was in 2020. Was it 2022? It was either 2021 or 2022. I became a clinical director for a mental health facility. And at the time they were in transition and they wanted to do, we want to make sure that we're providing trauma informed care. We spent 2 hours in a meeting talking about the colors on the wall, what the lobby needed to look like. And I had to sit there because it wasn't my meeting. But when I had the opportunity to talk, I said, you spent 2 hours, you wasted it because we're not talking about trauma informed care. This is trauma informed care. And I shared what I shared with you. And the importance of trauma informed care, especially for someone who has experienced guilt, is because they need to know that they're in a place where an individual is not going to judge them intentionally or unintentionally. We can do harm. Not just clinicians. I want to say family members, friends that try to talk to individuals when they're sharing that they feel guilt for whatever reason that they feel it. Never say, "Oh, you shouldn't feel that way." Get an understanding. Why do you feel that way? That's trauma informed care. When we can get that understanding, and because safety is not just physical. And I think everyone has to understand that. It is not just physical. Safety is I can become safer in a physical environment, but if you harm me with this, with your mouth, with your words, what I've seen is this. Sometimes that can block someone from seeking the assistance that they need. Because guilt is, again, I said this earlier, it's an isolating emotion. And what will happen is if you come to me and I harm you with and I'm not using a trauma informed approach and I harm you with my words, guilt will say to you, "See, I told you." And this is why you can't depend on anybody else to help you through this but yourself.
Yeah.
So we
Mm,
have to be mindful with what trauma informed care really really is. And what it looks like for the person who needs it, not just the person who's providing it.
mhm. I said a couple of times throughout these episode recordings, but for the longest time, I thought that I just was not meant for therapy because I didn't like the people I was talking to and so on and so forth. But it's kind of like you're dating somebody, right?
Absolutely. That's a good analogy.
I was like, wow, like it took me a while to finally find somebody I enjoy talking to.
Mhm.
So,
And just, just in case a
oh,
listener is going, you know what? That's me too. It took me a long time. I encourage individuals, you interview your potential therapist. You don't have to accept just the first person that your insurance has, referred you to or someone else has referred you to. You interview them. You have that right. In fact, you should. This isn't a plug for me, but this is how I believe therapy should be approached. You should, or I encourage you, schedule a consultation with a potential therapist. How long have you worked with individuals who have experienced challenges with processing grief or guilt? Talking about grief. I'm sorry, guilt. You should ask that therapist that question because you want to know what has their experience been. You have the right to say no to a therapist. I also tell people you might interview 3 or 4 therapists or maybe 5 or 6 before you find the right one. That is a part of the process. It's not a
mhm.
part of the process we enjoy, but it is a part of the process.
So what advice would you have for like family or friends to help support people who are going through guilt? I know you kind of touched on it just a little bit ago, but anything further for them?
Um, I would first of all, I would encourage them, whether it's a family or whether it's a friend, to actually verbalize, "Thank you for trusting me enough to share this emotion with me." And then give a disclaimer. If I say anything or do anything that makes you feel further guilt, please let me know. You're giving them permission to continue being truthful with you. Also, don't don't say, "Oh, well, oh, you shouldn't feel that way," or just let it go. Or, "That was so long ago. Why are you still thinking about that?" Because it's still very real to them. That's why. Those are the don'ts. The do's, again, thank them for trusting you because that's exactly what they did. They trusted you. Support them. If in talking to them you recognize that they need some additional support, encourage that. You talk to me, is there anyone else that you may feel comfortable or would want to talk to? And if you're feeling a little nervous about that, would you like for me to go with you? These are the do's. When you offer that support, follow up. Do what you said you're going to do. And if you can't, express that you can't. And then also, if it's something that you're not comfortable with, how you verbalize that is important. Making sure that you say, the issue is or the challenge is not with you, it's me. I'm uncomfortable with hearing this is a lot different than, "Oh, I don't want to hear that because you make me feel uncomfortable." Now what's happened is the person thinks that they're the cause of your feeling, and then you've just added more guilt onto them. So saying something like, "This is a topic that is uncomfortable for me, but I want to be able to support you. And maybe we together can talk with someone." That way you're clearly identifying they're not the issue. The issue or the challenge is with you, not with them, nor with what they're wanting to share. Being honest, if it is something, and that's for the family or the friend, if it's not something that you can hold space for, because it might trigger you, be honest about that.
So what are some ways that we who feel the guilt should talk to ourselves to maybe help us kind of change that script?
Okay. One way is to, again, acknowledge how you feel. Emotions are there for a reason, even guilt. Emotions do one of three things. They alert us that we need to be aware of something. They alert us that something needs to change. They alert us that something needs to be worked through or processed. That's the purpose of emotions. What happens is, with our emotions, we talk to ourselves, and then how we feel becomes our belief. We need to understand that emotions are not beliefs. Okay. Um, and in order to address those things, if you've been talking to yourself, if you're feeling guilty because you feel as though you failed yourself or you failed someone else, it's not "I failed," it's "I learned." When we talk about "I fail," it's like a final judgment, like nothing can be changed. But instead, "I learned." I see it as an invitation to grow, or I see it as an invitation to correct something. I've learned that in this situation, this wasn't the best choice, and I had the opportunity for a do-over. Okay, so it's our mindset, how we think is really, really important. Guilt will tell you that you don't deserve forgiveness. You absolutely do. But first and foremost, you have to learn how to forgive yourself. And forgiving yourself for feeling guilty isn't what you need to forgive yourself for. Forgiveness will be for the things that you did as a result of how guilt showed up in your life. For example, if you isolated, forgive yourself for that. And then recognize, here, I have an opportunity. I can make a correction. Another thing that would be important is to recognize, again, you're not responsible for anything other than you. You're not responsible for other people's choices. You're not even responsible for other people's beliefs. Reminding yourself that you are responsible for your choices, and reframing this like, um I'm responsible for how they feel, or when the example that I used, that when you tripped and fell. No, you are giving back responsibility by saying, I'm not responsible for that. I am responsible for me. The other thing is recognizing that guilt is an emotion, it's not an identity.
Mm,
I'm always bad. I'll never do anything good. I'll never be anybody good. These are things that we can say as a result of feeling guilty. Your worth is not determined by the things that you have done that you need to correct or do again. Your worth is determined by how you choose to grow from those things that you need to correct. Let me see, anything else? I'm trying to think of, I wrote some things down and I'm like, I can't even get to it. Um, Release. Be willing to release. I'm always going to carry this guilt. I'm always going to feel this way. No, not if you choose to process and choose to do the work, but also recognize you don't have to do it by yourself. Give yourself some grace and recognize you don't have to carry this by yourself. There are people who are willing to carry it with you and to help you release it.
thank you.
You're welcome.
So you mentioned that you do a couple things. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about you and what you do?
Okay. Well, again, I am a licensed clinical social worker. I do have a private practice. It's called Behind the Veil Consultations. I'm licensed in 6 states, so I am able to provide therapy for anyone who resides in one of those states that I'm licensed in. I am also a certified life coach, and there is a difference between coaching and therapy.
Can you
There,
explain that?
pardon me.
Can you explain the difference?
Yes, yes. One of the major differences between therapy and coaching is therapy is a processing journey that requires a diagnosis. It requires a licensed professional, whether that's a licensed clinical social worker, a licensed psychologist, a mental health a mental health nurse practitioner. They're able to diagnose. Psychiatrists and nurse practitioners can also prescribe medications. Okay. Therapy also looks at and identifies the root of what has caused whatever mental health challenge is going on, whether that's depression, if that's anxiety, if that's PTSD, if it's of of anything that has a diagnosis, okay? And they help you to work through it. Coaching is meant to be an avenue or a resource that you use to get you from where you are to where you want to be. Um, to put it a different way, how do I want to explain this? Okay. Coaching coaching is meant to be an encouragement, a support. It's kind of like that uplift, that get up and go that you need to accomplish something that is non-mental health related.
Okay.
Okay. There are times when people come to me and they think that they want to coach because I work with women who are in the mental health and the faith-based community, in leadership, and they're wanting to do a shift in career, or they're wanting to expand, or they're even wanting to work on things like guilt. It depends on what's going on and what the root of the guilt is, where I tell them, okay, coaching is appropriate or therapy is needed. Because if they have some underlying issues, if they're self-harming, if they're dealing with uh, complicated issues, like it's impacting their sleep, impacting their eating, impacting their ability to show up and tend for themselves. They don't need coaching, they need therapy.
Makes sense.
Okay. I know some people probably won't like me for saying that, but there is a huge difference. There is a huge difference. So what I do with individuals is I let them have a free consult with me. And that is where we determine, yep, if coaching is appropriate or if therapy is needed. Some people come to me and they're aware, you know what, I know I need therapy. I offer them a free consult as well. So the long way of answering your question, and I apologize for that. But if someone wanted to do a free consult for therapy, the only thing that they would need to do is visit my website, which is www.btvconsultations.com. And when they go to the homepage, they can schedule a free consult there. If someone wanted to contact me for coaching, they would use, oh my Lord, what is I just forgot it. Now I have a bit.ly. Me and bit.lys are not friends.
Oh,
But the link would be bit.ly/freedom strategy call. That gives them the opportunity for coaching. Now, if they're not sure which one they want to use, or if they need coaching or therapy, use either one, because I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be honest with you in either way. So,
Perfect. Yeah.
and if they want to, they can follow. I am on Facebook. Tanyka Abbott is my Facebook handle. Every Friday, I do what we call conversations at the Freedom Table. And this is where we just talk about real life situations. And I give 3 to 4 just different strategies to deal with the topic of the day. And that's every Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. They can just go right to my Facebook page. I know Facebook only leaves lives up for 30 days. So, but there'll always be at least one there.
Right. Okay. Awesome. And then I guess, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to share, or anything you want to leave the listeners with?
Um, I just want to leave the listeners with this. If you are experiencing guilt for any reason, I want to encourage you to let you know you don't have to continue to carry it. There is support that is available. Um, I'm glad that you're listening to this podcast and you're listening to this episode. This is a support. Utilize it. You may not be in a position where you're ready to seek therapy or counseling. Utilize safe resources like Unfiltered Feels. Utilize that. If you think that you may want coaching or you may want therapy or you're not sure, you can of course utilize me or anyone else if you know of a therapist or a counselor that is available in your area. Utilize them because you don't have to walk this alone. Guilt will tell you that you do. Guilt will tell you that no one understands. Hopefully, by this episode, you've learned that that's not true. Someone does care. That's the reason for this episode. That's the reason for this podcast. Someone does care. That's the reason I'm here to talk with you because I care. And guilt is a real emotion. You can experience it. You are experiencing it, but you can also release it and give yourself some grace. You're not responsible for how you feel. You are responsible for what you do with how you feel.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was great. I really appreciate you and your time.
Thank
I know we
you.
finally got to do this.
Yes, yes. And I hope I gave you what you needed.